Welcome to Kitchen Conversations. I'm so pleased that you've joined us today because we have a great guest and we have a great talk for you. Today we're going to be talking about setting boundaries. Maybe you've never had a problem with this before, but I surely have. And today my guest is Rhonda Thompson. Rhonda, welcome. So glad you're here.
Great to be here.
Rhonda, tell our audience just a little bit about who you are and why you get to be my guest today.
Well, I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I work with families on things like setting boundaries. And I'm in private practice, and so I'm here to talk to you today.
Well, I'm really pleased you are because, in fact, Rhonda's helped me a great deal because I've had a couple issues with boundaries. In my family, I'm the oldest daughter. And so it kind of falls upon me to take care of everybody and everything. And other people in my family just maybe don't.
Yes.
And it's been really tough, and I know you've been giving me some good support because I need to let you know. I called up my sister, and I was strong.
Yes.
And said, you know, sis, you really need to have Mom for a few weeks this summer. She deserves to spend time with you. She deserves to be back there. And you know what? She said yes. So I'm taking my mom back to spend some time with her, and it's right because it is her little girl, and I know my mom wants to be with her. So
yes. That's
you help me with
excellent.
boundaries, but tell us, what are boundaries and why are they so difficult?
Well, boundaries are a really interesting thing because it sounds sort of like a therapy term. You know, it sounds like that sort of a thing that you hear somebody who's, you know, we're boundaries. We have to set our boundaries. And
you don't have any.
That's right. You have no boundaries. You hear about it a lot in, you know, people who are kind of therapy savvy, people, it's often used in the 12-step recovery model. So a lot of people who are in 12-step programs will talk about boundaries, and so, you know, sometimes people kind of think, oh yeah, you know, that's someone who's kind of therapy-wise.
Yeah, they're out there.
But actually, you know what, if you think about boundaries as, Robert Frost as an example said, good fences make good neighbors.
Well, isn't that true? If you don't have a fence, then their stuff grows over on your yard, and then your stuff might blow in their yard, and then they don't like you. And
what if you have a 12-foot tall concrete wall between you and your neighbor?
That maybe isn't a good boundary. That one's too big. Like, then I can't even see the mountains anymore.
Yes, exactly.
No, like
that boundary's a little too rigid. It's hard for you to see your neighbor, and sometimes, you know, you want to be able to, you know, have some interaction. We all can't just live in our little fortress.
It's an interesting concept you have. We are all in Southern California here, and everybody has a fence around their yard. Most of them are about 5 to 6 feet tall, and they're pretty solid.
Yes.
My sister and I several years ago flew into Minneapolis, and we were coming in over the airport, and I remember looking down and I said, Joe, could you tell me what's wrong with this picture? And she goes, I don't know, I don't see anything wrong. And I go, no, look at the houses. There were no fences. I don't know how those neighbors work.
Yes.
But it was very different.
It's true. When I visit my family up in Seattle, well, the uncle that I'm thinking of has a property that where there's just like everybody has like one big lawn that goes across, you know, and there is no boundary. There's sort of no fence. But what would happen
if you had a neighbor with crabgrass? Not so good.
Yes, exactly.
So tell us what boundaries are. Is boundary just my personal space that I have my issue with how close people get to me? That's a boundary I've heard about.
It's all of those things.
You're standing in my space.
Probably the ones that we're the most familiar with are the ones where it's like if I'm really close to you, you know, it might feel, we've all sort of had that experience of having a person who's kind of a close talker, someone who gets in your face and you feel like you're having to lean back and kind of get out of the way.
Or those people who think they should have the right to hug you and you're going, well, really, who are you?
Yes, and so all of those things are examples of boundaries, ways that we feel comfortable and ways that we don't. Then you've also maybe had the experience of hugging somebody that didn't want to be hugged.
Yeah,
and you
like
get the
hugging a stick. That's all odd too.
Yes. So, you know, there's a lot of personal variation as well. Some of this can just be a part of temperament. You know, you may be a more introverted kind of person and you might not be quite as comfortable with all of the touchy-feely sort of a thing that's out there. And as an example, in my family, I tend to be more of an introvert, my husband is, and my oldest daughter is. And then we have our one little extrovert, who's my youngest daughter, who's very touchy-feely, who just wants to always be hugging and in your space and playing with your hair. And it's difficult sometimes for my two daughters to be comfortable with each other and their personal styles and their comfort level with boundaries.
So now we're going to talk about boundaries that are a little bit bigger. Not just my personal space, but what are some other boundaries that we have in our lives?
There are boundaries everywhere you look. There are boundaries just within our own personal space, then there are boundaries within the family. You have a boundary around your family, and then each family has boundaries around, you know, your local community. You have boundaries in your church communities, maybe your workplace, absolutely. And each one of those boundaries is around a system. So if you are looking, that it kind of ties in, and of course in my profession, I do a lot of work with family systems, but other systems as well. And the idea of the system is that the boundaries around a system could be either rigid, very, very tight, rigid, hard to get in, hard to get out.
Okay. So if you have a club or a clique and you have to have special things, or you can't come here.
Yes. Yes.
That would be more of a closed system.
That's a good example, because in a boundary like that, that's a very rigid boundary to get into or get out of. But once you're in there, the people within that very rigid boundary tend to have more diffuse boundaries. They tend to be a lot more alike. Everybody kind of has to think the same thing, act the same way,
say the same words,
do the same thing.
I really saw this with my teenagers. You know, as they got into the teenage years, you had to say the right things, and then you didn't like your mother anymore.
Yes, exactly.
Mom, could you please park a long way away and let me walk to school?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you can see that too with even just some of the goofy behavior, and you see them all kind of acting really silly, and you just think, what is that about? It only happens within that little group kind of a thing. They have certain behaviors that will sort of happen, and it identifies them with that group. So, but what happens is that if a boundary around a group is too rigid, and there's too much of the boundaries between the individual people within the group are very diffuse, there can be a loss of a sense of your own autonomy, your own way of being in the world. You kind of can lose some of your independence.
So for some of this, I'm particularly thinking of gangs.
Absolutely.
I join it. Now I have this rigid edge on my gang. I have this rigid edge, and gangs exist everywhere. They're not all bad.
Yes.
But I have this rigid outside experience now. I belong in. I will wear the colors. I will act like you are. But suddenly, I'm not different than you are. And so an idea comes up that I could, in my own moral value system or something that I've been taught, and a little inner voice goes, you really don't want to participate in that. I find I'm not an individual enough to go, don't want to do that.
You're not allowed to make that decision. When that boundary outside of the group is very rigid, and the boundaries within are very diffuse. You have to believe the way they believe. You have to do what they do, or else you're going to suffer some serious consequences.
Okay.
And those consequences are things not necessarily just in a gang. You know, you can have some serious consequences if you are in a family system and you do something different from what the family system thinks that you should do.
Well, and I've seen very strong families. They grow up determined. They have very strong borders. They're very loyal to each other, which is good.
Yes.
And yet, the children are expected to perform a certain way. Maybe they all take music lessons, or maybe they're all sports figures, or they're going to be well educated, or they're going to be lawyers, or physicians, or merchants, or chiefs, whatever the family chooses.
Right.
And so if I would like to choose something differently, and it doesn't work so well.
It doesn't. And sometimes that can be very painful experiences for people who have this, you know, who have this dilemma of, what do I choose? You know, do I choose to stay loyal to this very rigid system, or do I choose to do something that I really want to pursue, you know, something that I feel very passionate about, but isn't really validated by this family system? Do I lose my sense of connection? And that's ultimately what motivates all of us. You know, we all need to be connected in whatever group we're in, and we don't want to lose that connection. If we lose connection, then that's that very rigid outside, you know, you either have to believe the way we believe or you are shunned.
Oh, that's very painful, and I'm sure you get some people in your therapy groups because of those issues where I really want to be your child, I really want to be your friend, I don't want to lose our holidays and our enjoyment of each other, I don't want to lose that, but yet I like to be
I want to be my own person.
And maybe I'm an artist, and I think your family that you just shared, your family, 3 of you being more introverted, and now you have your little twinkly, huggy, sweetie out there girl.
Yes.
That can happen in a family. You of course, are astute enough to understand that, but she's going to go out there and make a different kind of life for herself.
Yes. And we have to be comfortable with her going out there and being kind of out there. You know, doing things that we wouldn't necessarily do just on the basis of our temperament. You know, we might hang back a little bit and sort of look at things differently and be more cautious. She might run out there and make a lot of mistakes, you know, put her foot in her mouth, say some things, be dramatic, you know, all of those things. And it's on us to have to be flexible enough. You know, if you think of like a rubber band, I wish I had a rubber band, you know, that it should be flexible enough that it can shift with you, it can move with you. An ideal boundary is a boundary that's flexible. So, you know, if you think of the Goldilocks Principle, have you ever heard of that?
Oh yeah, there was just a second. Goldilocks went to the house and there were 3 bears. Mama bear, Papa bear, and baby bear. And she tried Papa bear's chair and it was too hard. And Mama bear's chair was too soft.
Yes.
And baby bear's chair was
just right. And that's what you're looking for in boundaries. You're looking for that sweet spot of just right. That's what you want. If it's too hard, if your boundaries are too rigid, then it's too difficult for you to come and go and to have your own sense of self. If they're too diffuse, if it's too soft, if that boundary's too soft, you don't know where you belong.
And there's an error too that happens I've seen in families where family members don't know where they belong.
Right.
Or children don't know how to behave or relate or react because nobody's ever told them where the edges are.
Yes, exactly. So you're really looking for that just right. And what is just right to you might not be just right to the family next door. There are a lot of different things. So for instance, my family with my introverts and extroverts, we're having to balance those things out. You might have a different lineup with a different family, and they'll have to find different ways of balancing it. You can also have differences in terms of cultural expectations.
Yes.
So there are some cultures where it's the norm. It feels comfortable. It feels safe to have more rigid boundaries between people, and then maybe somebody from a different culture will come and maybe move to a different place where the expectations are different, and then they feel like they don't quite fit in.
How do I fit in? And then you know what? Isn't that the human cry of our hearts? We want to fit in.
Yes.
We want to have meaning and purpose to someone, and it's really nice if it's our family of origin.
Absolutely.
And our friends or relationships. You know, I don't know that I knew the name of it with boundaries, but I do remember when my children were little.
Yes.
They knew where they were.
Yes.
They knew where the boundary was around our family, and they loved to go and stick their foot over it to see if it was still there.
Yes.
You know, you're pushing the edges, and you go, why are you doing this?
Yes.
Is it still there?
Right.
And for some of that, is it still there? I think when they were smaller, it was almost a safety.
Absolutely.
I know how to act. I know how far I can go with this behavior, and then I know what my family thinks isn't appropriate behavior.
That's actually a really important point about the developmental life cycle of a boundary in a family. Because at the very beginning, when a mom is carrying her baby in the womb, there's no boundary there. It's virtually no boundary. There's right there. These are two entities that are joined together like one. And then once that baby is born, that baby completely depends on the family system around them to have every little thing taken care of. And there's still almost no boundary. It's a very, very diffuse boundary. But over time, gradually, there's a very gradual change in a movement where where you are trying to get this baby to grow to a child, to grow to a young adult, to ultimately go out into the world
and function independently. Would be really nice if you have the right kind of boundaries.
Yes.
I think there's some people who really prefer their children don't get there, which seems odd to me. You know, somebody said something to me that I just want to share with you here because it made so much sense now that we're talking about boundaries.
Yes.
I remember when my teenagers, well, they weren't teen, they were just that preteen, that 11 to 14, when you just go, oh, please, do I have to live through this?
Yes.
They were just that age. And I remember talking with a woman who was a little older than me, and her children were in their mid-20s and were quite settled. And I said, oh, how proud you must be, how good you must feel. And she goes, just a minute, how old are your kids?
Yes.
So I told her, and she goes, oh. She goes, you know what? This is very normal. She said, you know, you've given your child, it's kind of like a plate.
Yes.
And it's a plate full of options, and this is what my family values, this is what we believe, this is the way we treat each other, this is all of these things that create our norms, our boundaries, what we have. And she says it's very normal that sometime during childhood, during this teenage piece of childhood, that your child should go like this. Sweep the plate clean, and then they look around and they start picking up pieces and putting what they value back on the plate. And you hope they pick most of them up. You hope.
Yes.
And she said, because if they don't do that, the likelihood is that sometime in their life they still have to deal with all of these things that they got from their family of origin. And if they do this when they're 30 or 40, off go a lot more people, maybe a new maybe their own personal family and their own children, and so boundaries are a terribly important thing.
They really are, and you know, that's an example of a family that had flexible enough boundaries to allow the people within the system to be able to stretch and grow and figure out, you know, kind of with that rubber band to go out a little bit. Maybe they go quite a bit out, but then they stretch and they kind of come back in and find an equilibrium, you know, within that system.
Well, that sounds really good. Now, are boundaries the same for men as women? I mean, do we have the same relationship to boundaries, or is it like a little...
Women tend to be more relationship oriented, whereas men tend to be, you know, it doesn't mean that men don't need connection, because everybody as a human experience needs to be connected. But women tend to really be focused on the relationship part and really afraid to lose connection or lose that, that relationship. And as a result of that, women very often in setting boundaries will tend to not want to say no. They don't want to disappoint someone because they don't want to lose that relationship.
And I do see this so often with women. We say yes, yes, yes. We're exhausted. We fall into depression. We get all those other places. We get ourselves in a really bad mess. And then we don't even know how to get out of it. And if we choose to say no, our family is in absolute shock.
Yes. It can be scary because there again, it's sort of like that adolescent that has to kind of push out a little bit and then figure out where their equilibrium is. A lot of times when I have women come and see me, and this is their problem, they can't say no, they can't say no. One of my suggestions is to flip that around, and if your default answer is always yes, 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 I really challenge them to try making their default answer no.
Whoa! That takes bravery.
It does take bravery, because what you have to do then is your default answer is no unless you can talk yourself into it, unless you can tell yourself you have a really good reason to say yes. These are for women who say yes and they deplete themselves and they overfunction in their systems, their family systems, their relationship systems. And they do so much overfunctioning that they burn themselves out, they feel resentful, they feel depressed, they feel angry.
You know what? I know that happens, and it isn't okay for women to be angry, right?
Well, a lot of times, yes.
Anger is good. It propels us to some other place, especially if we channel it correctly.
Right. Absolutely.
But we do say yes a lot. I find that in healthcare particularly, our healthcare workers are predominantly women who say yes.
Yes.
And I think it shocks the world when they say no.
It does. It is shocking. But, you know, one of the things that I tell people as well is that when you are in a system Every single person within that system has a role to play, and you're trying to achieve balance. You need some equilibrium. If you have one person in the system that is always saying yes, who's over-functioning, what happens then with the other people in the system? They underfunction.
They don't have to.
They don't have to.
They may never fly out of the nest.
And don't you think maybe in some ways that's depriving them of being able to contribute positively to this system that they're a part of?
Well, that's a really great thought, isn't it?
It's a good reframe.
It is a great reframe. But you want them, most people want to be treated as mature and independent, and that their thoughts value and they matter and they count.
Yes.
But if I overfunction, are you telling me that if I overfunction as my mother, my momminess, that my children maybe can't grow up the way they should have been, or my husband can't attain what he would have liked to have attained because...
Maybe they won't even know that they can do it because you've never even really given them a chance to try.
Wow.
And maybe they think, well, really, Mom's the only one that can do this. I have this situation with my daughter, too. Well, I have two daughters, obviously, but I have one who will wait for me to give her permission to do things. And I always have to think in my mind, you know, am I doing something for her that she really could do for herself? And then I want to challenge her. I want to say, give it a try. Don't worry if you make a mistake on it. It's not that big of a deal. Just try it. Try it yourself and see what happens. And to be able to offer her that flexibility, to be able to make a mistake, even if it means that's how she learns.
But that's how you learn. Most of us, I have come to realize, learn very little from mistakes of other people.
It's actually,
unfortunately,
that's been shown even in research.
I need to make my own mistake.
Yes.
And as a parent, that's really, really difficult. To watch your child walk out the door and going to walk right into something you know
that's right.
they're going to mess up, and yet you stand by and bravely watch them do that and then pick up the pieces.
Yes.
That's important.
Yes.
Well, Rhonda, what advice would you have for me if I didn't grow up in a particularly healthy family? I didn't have boundaries. I was the little bear, not Goldilocks, you know. and nobody figured it out for me. So I was raised in a family.
So, well, you know what? If you grow up in a family that doesn't have particularly flexible boundaries, if they're maybe either, it sort of depends, you know, if you grew up in a family where you had very rigid boundaries, sometimes you might not know to trust yourself. Sometimes you might really think that you have to check in with the group and you have to be a pleaser. And so that might be one of the challenges that you might have if you grew up in a family that had very rigid boundaries on the outside, and then we all have to believe and think the same way. If you grew up in a family where the boundaries were more diffuse and you were very independent, you might actually end up growing up you know, your challenge might then to be to let your guard down and trust other people. And let other people come in, you know, be a little more connected, not try to do everything yourself. Learn to trust other people. So that, it kind of depends on what the boundaries were in your family. But you can look at what you were raised with and what you grew up with, and then you can sort of have an idea of, oh yeah, I can see where that came from. Not as a way of judging or blaming the family that you grew up in.
Yeah, we shouldn't be.
No.
I think, of course,
we come by it honestly.
From the perspective I sit at now, as being the parent,
I
used to think, once upon a time I thought, I need to become a parent because I was going to be such an amazing parent. Oh, well, laugh really hard with me, all of you who've been parents. And then I realized that I became a parent for the lessons my child taught me. And I became a better person because I had these children who did strange things. Same with boundaries. So if
Sometimes we do the opposite of how we were raised. And sometimes we might end up going to the opposite continuum. Other times we do something very similar to the way we were raised. So we tend to either repeat the pattern, or we tend to go in the opposite direction.
And yet,
you're looking for the balance. You're looking for the sweet spot.
And yet, as parents, mostly we did the best we knew how.
Absolutely.
With the resources we had, with the education and the knowledge we had, we did the best.
Absolutely.
I think I did the best I could with my kids.
Yes.
I'm sure they have stories to tell when I'm not around. Don't you wish you could be a fly on the wall?
Yes.
No, maybe not. Then again, maybe not.
Yes.
So establishing a boundary or understanding. Maybe that's what we need to do, is clarify for ourselves, what are my boundaries?
Yes.
What matter to me? How do I let people in?
Right.
How do I let people out? How
It's
rigid
essentially,
do I hold this, or
right.
can I have some little gates and doors in my
Absolutely.
fences?
It's essentially about maintaining connection, but also having a healthy sense of self, not losing yourself in a relationship, but maintaining connection. You know, you don't want to cut off.
Right.
But then the other part of this too is to find balance. You don't want to be all or nothing. You want to hang on to that Goldilocks principle.
Okay.
And then, you know, some of the other principles that you can keep in mind as you are starting to establish healthy boundaries, probably one of the most important ones is that you're responsible for yourself, not anybody else. Let others be responsible for themselves.
So I need to be responsible for me. I am not responsible for my husband.
No.
Can we send him this? Surprise, surprise. And not my nearly adult. Well, my kids are all adults now.
That's
They're
right.
all over 21. So I'm not responsible for them.
No. I mean, you're responsible in the sense that,
Well,
you know, you're going to always be connected to them and you want to
Absolutely.
look out for them, but ultimately they're in charge of themselves and you have to let them be that and trust that they can be. You also, going along with this, is you don't want to assume that you know what others need.
Yeah.
Because when you're assuming that you know what others need, that's a diffuse boundary. That's you getting into other people's space and taking over for them and not letting them, you know, have some say in the matter. And then on the other side of that, you don't want to assume that everybody else is going to know what you need. You don't want to wait and have people be a mind reader for you and, well, they should know. If they really loved me, they would know. And that's a fallacy. That actually isn't the case. It's up to you to define what it is that you need in a relationship. Don't wait for other people to read your mind.
These have been very good conversations. I'm so thankful you've come to my kitchen, and I just know that I'm going to be better for understanding my own boundaries, for setting those things, for letting people be responsible to themselves, and then enjoy them. Enjoy the friendships we've been given. That's a terribly important thing for us to do. We have been given friends, we have been born into families, and we are going to have a great life if we respect each other, we set healthy boundaries. And so until we meet again in my kitchen, just enjoy your life, make the most of it, and I look forward to seeing you here again really soon. Well, that was really great. I just enjoy this. I mean, I've tried really hard to be a good person and make my boundaries healthy.
Yes.
But it's the work of a lifetime, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. It's all about balance.
Yeah, balance. And I like that. Don't fall in either ditch.
Yeah.
Stay balanced.
Yeah.
Stay balanced. Done.
There's